Captain Dua, Kim stood at the bridge of the Earth exploration vessel, Horizon Seeker, his eyes fixed on the massive space station ahead. It was his first time seeing alien architecture up close, and it was nothing like the movies back home had imagined. The Galactic Council's headquarters looked like a giant crystal snowflake, with light dancing across its surface in patterns he couldn't quite understand. "Captain, they're hailing us again," said Lieutenant Min at the communication station. "They seem nervous." Dua straightened his uniform. After decades of searching the stars, humanity had finally made contact with the Galactic Council 3 days ago. Now, instead of the careful first contact protocols they had practiced, the Council had rushed them to their headquarters with unusual urgency. "Put them on screen," Dua ordered, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. The main screen flickered to life, showing a chamber filled with beings of various shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, others were completely alien. But one thing united them all. They looked terrified. Earth vessel. A tall, silver-skinned being stepped forward. "I am High Counselor Rajin. Thank you for coming so quickly. We need to confirm something. In your species' history, have you ever encountered the Shadow Moss?" Dua looked at his first officer, Yuri, who shrugged slightly. "I apologize, High Counselor, but we've never heard of them. We're new to interstellar travel and—" The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Rajin's silver skin paled even further. "Impossible. Your system should have been destroyed centuries ago. The Shadow Moss target developing civilizations first. They're drawn to them like moths to a flame," Yuri suggested helpfully. "Yes, exactly." Another council member jumped up. "Which is why we don't understand how your Earth has survived. The Shadow Moss have destroyed 12 civilizations in the past year alone. They're getting more aggressive, more organized. Nothing can stop them. Nothing can even communicate with them." Dua felt a chill run down his spine. Whenever these Shadow Moss were, they had the most powerful beings in the galaxy scared senseless. He was about to ask for more information when a quiet voice spoke up from the back of his bridge. "Excuse me," Jai-Wan Lee, their xenobiologist, stepped forward. She had been so quiet during their journey that Dua sometimes forgot she was part of the bridge crew. "You mentioned they're drawn to developing civilizations. Could you show us some footage of these creatures?" The council members looked at each other nervously before Rajin nodded. The main screen split, and Dua felt his jaw drop. Massive creatures, each the size of a small moon, moved through space like living shadows. Their bodies seemed to bend light around them. And where they passed, entire planets went dark. But Jai-Wan wasn't looking at the destruction. Her eyes were fixed on something else, something in the creature's movement patterns. She pulled out her tablet and started taking notes frantically. "Captain," she whispered, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear, "I need to study this footage. I think everyone's been looking at this all wrong." Before Dua could respond, alarms blared through the council chamber. A young alien rushed in, their tentacles waving in panic. "High Counselor, the Shadow Moss. They've appeared in the Nexus system. 3 of them." The council erupted in chaos. Rajin turned to the Earth crew, his voice heavy with defeat. "You should return to your planet. Warn your people. The Nexus system had our strongest defenses, our most advanced weapons. If it falls—" But Dua was watching Jai-Wan, who was still studying the footage with intense concentration. In his years as a captain, he had learned to trust his crew's instincts. And right now, his xenobiologist looked like someone who had just solved a puzzle no one else could see. "High Counselor," Dua said firmly, "if you'll allow it, we'd like to observe how these creatures operate. Maybe a fresh perspective is exactly what's needed here." Rojin stared at him like he had grown a second head. "You want to observe them? Captain Kim, these creatures have destroyed civilizations thousands of years more advanced than yours." Dua smiled slightly. "Yes, but sometimes the simplest solutions come from the least expected places, And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's understanding animals that everyone else fears. The bridge fell silent as the council considered his words. In the background, Jai-1 continued her analysis, a small smile playing on her lips. Whatever she had noticed in that footage, Duha had a feeling it was about to change everything. "Watch closely," He-Jin said, pointing to a massive creature that seemed to swim through space itself. Its body was longer than 10 Earth ships put together, and it moved like oil and water, smooth and deadly. This was taken 3 months ago in the Nexus system. Duha and his crew watched as the creature approached a planet glowing with city lights. The Shadow Maw's body seemed to ripple, and then it simply passed through the planet's defensive shields like they weren't there. "That's impossible," Yuri whispered. "Those energy readings, those shields could stop a supernova." "Exactly," He-Jin replied sadly. "Nothing stops them. Nothing even slows them down. Watch what happens next." The footage showed the creature spreading itself over the planet's surface like a living blanket of darkness. Slowly, methodically, the city lights began to go out. Section by section, the planet went dark. "They feed on energy," He-Jin explained. "Power plants, fusion cores, even the basic electrical systems that keep our cities running. They drain everything. And when they're done," he pressed a button, and the image changed to show the planet after the attack. It was completely dark, lifeless. "How many people were on that planet?" Duha asked quietly. 8 billion. He-Jin answered. "We managed to evacuate 2 million before the power failed. The rest." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jai-1, who had been taking notes the entire time, suddenly raised her hand. "Can you show me footage of their first appearance in a system, before they attack?" He-Jin looked confused but nodded. The display changed to show a different system. 3 Shadow Maws appeared from what seemed like nowhere, their massive bodies blocking out the stars behind them. "Look at that," Jai-1 pointed excitedly. "Captain, do you see it? The way they move when they first arrive." Duha squinted at the display. The creatures were moving in an odd pattern, almost like they were. "They're searching for something," Jai-1 continued. "See how they circle the outer planets first. It's exactly like hunting behavior we see in deep-sea creatures on Earth." The council members looked at each other in confusion. One of them, a tall being made of what looked like crystal, spoke up. "Young human, we have studied these creatures for centuries. They are simply monsters, destroying everything in their path." Jai-1 shook her head firmly. "No, you're wrong. Nothing in nature destroys just to destroy. There's always a reason, always a pattern. These creatures, they're following their instincts. They're hunting, yes, but they're hunting for food in the only way they know how." He-Jin stepped closer to the display. "What makes you so sure?" "Because," Jai-1 said, pulling up her notes, "in every single attack you've shown us, they follow the exact same pattern. They test the outer planets first, then move inward. They always start with the largest power sources. And look here," she pointed to a particular sequence. "When 2 Shadow Maws meet, they communicate with these light patterns. They're coordinating their hunting." Duha felt a spark of hope. If Jai-1 was right, if these creatures were just following natural hunting patterns. "We're going to need more footage," he announced. "Everything you have on their behavior, their movements, their interactions with each other. If we can understand their patterns, maybe we can find a way to redirect them." The crystal being laughed, a sound like tinkling bells. "Redirect them? We can't even touch them. Our most powerful weapons pass right through them." "Maybe that's been the problem all along," Yuri spoke up, understanding where her captain was going with this. "You've been trying to fight them like they're an enemy army. But what if we tried understanding them instead, like we would with any other animal?" He-Jin looked at the Earth crew with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "You really think you can help? Your species has never even left its own solar system before now." Duha smiled. Sometimes the best solutions come from fresh eyes. And if there's one thing humans have learned from our own world, it's that even the deadliest creatures can be understood if you take the time to study them properly. As if to emphasize his point, alarms began blaring again. More shadow maws had been spotted, heading toward a heavily populated system. "Well," Duha said, straightening his uniform, "looks like we're about to get a chance to study them up close. G1, get ready. You're about to have a front row seat to observe the galaxy's deadliest predators." The council members stared at the humans in shock. Here they were, faced with monsters that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than Earth's, and they wanted to study them. Either humans were incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Only time would tell which it was. Jai-1 sat in the Horizon Seeker's science lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing shadow maw footage. She hadn't slept in 20 hours, but her eyes were bright with excitement. Next to her, Sunho, her research partner, was organizing data on his tablet. "Look at this again," she said, replaying a clip of a shadow maw approaching a planet. "See how it moves its front section back and forth before attacking. It's testing something." Sunho nodded, his fingers flying over his tablet, like a snake tasting the air with its tongue. "But what is it testing for?" Before Jai-1 could answer, Captain Duha walked into the lab. He looked tired but determined. "Please tell me you found something. The council is getting nervous about having us study these creatures instead of evacuating." Jai-1 smiled and pressed a button. The main display split into two images, one of a shadow maw, the other of an earth creature. "Captain, meet the deep-sea anglerfish," she said proudly. "Notice anything similar?" Duha looked between the two images. The anglerfish was tiny compared to the shadow maw, but there was something about the way they moved. "They're both hunters that use energy to catch prey," Sunho explained. "The anglerfish uses a glowing lure to attract smaller fish. The shadow maw seems to be attracted to the energy signatures of advanced civilizations." "But that's not all," Jai-1 added excitedly. She pulled up more footage. "Watch what happens when they find a power source that's too small." The screen showed a shadow maw approaching a small mining colony. It circled once, then moved on without attacking. "They ignore it?" Duha asked, leaning closer. "Exactly." Jai-1 jumped up and started pacing. "They're not mindless destroyers. They're selective feeders. They only attack power sources above a certain size. Just like how an anglerfish won't waste energy chasing prey that's too small." Sunho pulled up another display. "We've analyzed hundreds of attacks. There's a clear pattern. They're attracted to electromagnetic frequencies that only large power grids produce. It's like they're following a scent trail we can't see." Duha rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So they're not targeting civilizations specifically. They're just following their food source." "Yes," both scientists said together. Jai-1 continued. "And look at this." She showed footage of two shadow maws meeting in space. "They're not just communicating. They're sharing information about hunting grounds. They flash these light patterns at each other, and then they split up to hunt in different systems. They're coordinating to avoid competing for the same food source." "That's actually incredible," Duha said slowly. "But how does this help us stop them?" Jai-1's eyes sparkled. "Who says we need to stop them? Captain, on Earth, what do we do with dangerous predators that come into human areas looking for food? We usually try to relocate them or—" "Wait." Duha's eyes widened. "You want to try to relocate creatures the size of moons?" "Not exactly," Sunho said, pulling up a new diagram. "But what if we could set up designated feeding areas? Places with controlled power sources that could satisfy their hunger without endangering populated systems. Like a wildlife sanctuary," Jai-1 added. "We could use artificial power sources to lead them away from inhabited worlds. If we understand their feeding patterns well enough, we might even be able to establish regular feeding schedules." Duha stared at his two scientists. The idea was crazy enough that it just might work. But there was one problem. How do we even begin to communicate with them? The Council's best minds have tried for centuries. Jai-1 grinned and pulled out a small device she had built. That's the best part. Remember how they use light patterns to communicate with each other? Well, I've been analyzing those patterns. They're not random. They're a language, a simple one, but a language, and I think I've figured out how to speak it. The device in her hands began to glow, pulsing with patterns similar to those they had seen the Shadowmaws use. You built this in 20 hours? Duha asked, amazed. When you grow up studying deep-sea creatures on Earth, Jai-1 said proudly, you learn a lot about communicating with light patterns. Now we just need to test it. As if on cue, the ship's alarms began to sound. Sun Ho checked his console, and his face went pale. Looks like we'll get our chance soon. 3 Shadowmaws just appeared in a nearby system. They're heading straight for a populated world. Duha looked at his 2 scientists, then at the device in Jai-1's hands. It was a crazy plan, but right now, it was the only plan they had. Well, he said with a slight smile, let's go make first contact. Again, the Horizon Seeker moved quietly through space, following the 3 Shadowmaws at a safe distance. On the bridge, everyone held their breath as they watched the massive creatures glide through the darkness. They haven't noticed us yet, Yuri whispered from her station. We're staying just outside their normal sensing range. Jai-1 and Sun Ho sat at a special station they had set up, surrounded by screens showing energy readings. They had been watching the creatures for hours, recording every movement and light pattern. There, Jai-1 pointed at one of her screens. See that spike in the readings? Every time they change direction, they release that same energy pattern. Sun Ho nodded excitedly. And look at the way the pattern changes when they get closer to the target system. It's like they're tasting the energy in space. Captain Duha walked over to their station. Show me what you found. Jai-1 pulled up a simple diagram on the main screen. Think of it like this, Captain. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy uses similar types of power grids. These power grids create specific patterns of electromagnetic energy that spread out into space. Like ripples in a pond, Sun Ho added. Exactly. Jai-1 continued. The Shadowmaws can sense these ripples from far away. But here's the interesting part. They're not just attracted to any energy. They're drawn to specific frequencies that only large power grids produce. Duha frowned. But why haven't they attacked Earth then? We have power grids. Because we're inefficient, Sun Ho said with a laugh. Our power grids are messy, disorganized compared to more advanced civilizations. We leak all sorts of random frequencies. But these more advanced worlds, their power grids are perfectly tuned, creating pure, clean energy signatures. And that's what attracts the Shadowmaws. Jai-1 finished. To them, these advanced power grids must look like perfect, irresistible meals. Suddenly, alarms started beeping at their station. One of the Shadowmaws had changed course, heading straight for a populated planet in the system. Quick, show me the planet's power readings, Jai-1 said. Sun Ho pulled up the data, just as we thought. Their main power plant puts out a pure frequency, exactly matching what attracts the Shadowmaws. Duha looked at the approaching creature, then at his scientists. So how do we stop it? Jai-1 grabbed her light pattern device. We don't stop it. We give it something better to eat. She started pressing buttons on her device. Sun Ho, help me adjust these frequencies. Together, they worked quickly, programming the device. The bridge crew watched as it started to pulse with beautiful patterns of light. What exactly are you doing? Yuri asked. We're creating a fake power signature, Sun Ho explained, one that looks even more delicious to them than a planetary power grid. It's like offering them their favorite food. Jai-1 looked up at Duha. Captain, we need to get closer. Close enough for them to notice our signal. Duha took a deep breath. No Earth ship had ever gotten this close to a Shadowmaw on purpose. but he trusted his crew. "Yuri, take us in." Nice and slow. The Horizon Seeker moved forward. On the main screen, they could see the massive shape of the Shadow Maw getting closer and closer. It was even more impressive up close, its body rippling with patterns of light and shadow. "It's noticed us," Yuri reported, her voice tense. The Shadow Maw had stopped moving toward the planet. Its massive form turned slowly toward their ship. "J1," Duha said nervously. "Wait for it," she replied, her eyes fixed on her readings. Just a few more seconds. The Shadow Maw moved closer to their ship. Everyone on the bridge held their breath. Then, something amazing happened. The creature began to pulse with light patterns that matched the ones coming from J1's device. It was responding to their signal. "It's talking to us," Sunho shouted excitedly. "Quick, send the next pattern." J1 adjusted her device, sending out a new sequence of lights. The Shadow Maw paused, then responded with its own pattern. "What's it saying?" Duha asked. J1's face broke into a huge smile. "It's curious. These patterns, they're like questions. It wants to know more about our energy signal." She looked up at her captain. "Sir, I think we just made first contact with a Shadow Maw. And it's not attacking. It's trying to communicate." The bridge erupted in excited whispers. After centuries of fear and destruction, humans had done in minutes what the most advanced races couldn't do in years. They had started a conversation with the galaxy's deadliest creatures. And this was just the beginning. The council chamber was in chaos. Holograms showed the Horizon Seeker floating peacefully next to a Shadow Maw, and nobody could believe their eyes. "Impossible," shouted one council member, their crystal body flashing with bright colors. "Those creatures have never shown anything but aggression." Captain Duha stood calmly at the center of the chamber, with J1 and Sunho beside him. Behind them stood Tai Yang Park, the ship's military expert, who had been quiet until now. "What you call aggression," Tai Yang said, stepping forward, "we call natural feeding behavior. And now we have a plan to work with that behavior instead of fighting it." Hajin, who had been watching silently, raised a hand for quiet. "Explain this plan of yours." J1 activated a hologram showing a map of the galaxy. "We found that Shadow Maws follow very specific hunting patterns. They're not random killers. They're intelligent creatures looking for food. So we propose creating safe feeding zones." Sunho pressed a button, and several points on the map lit up. "These are uninhabited systems we've identified. Each one can support a power station that generates the exact energy signature Shadow Maws are attracted to. Like setting up feeding stations for wild animals," Duha added. "We give them a safe place to feed, away from populated worlds." The council members looked at each other uncertainly. One of them, a tall being with 4 arms, spoke up. "And how do you plan to tell these creatures where to feed? They've destroyed our strongest communication attempts." Tai Yang smiled and gestured to J1. She pulled out her device and activated it. Beautiful patterns of light filled the chamber, dancing through the air like aurora. "We speak their language now," she said proudly. "These light patterns, they're not just random signals. They're a form of communication. Simple, but effective. Like whale songs from Earth's oceans." "Whale songs?" Heijin asked, confused. "Large creatures from our oceans," Sunho explained. "They communicate over vast distances using sound patterns. Shadow Maws do the same thing with light. And just like we learned to understand whales, we can communicate with Shadow Maws." Duha stepped forward again. "We've already successfully redirected one Shadow Maw from an inhabited system. Now we want to try something bigger." He nodded to Tai Yang, who activated another hologram. This one showed a detailed plan of action. First, Tai Yang explained, "We set up power stations in the safe zones. Then we create a network of communication buoys that can reproduce these light patterns. When Shadow Maws enter a system, the buoys activate, offering them directions to the nearest feeding station. Think of it like road signs," J1 added. We're not trying to control them. We're just showing them where they can find food safely." The council chamber fell silent as they considered this plan. Finally, Ho-Jin spoke. "This is madness. You want to spend resources building feeding stations for the very creatures that have destroyed countless worlds." Sometimes, Du has said quietly, the best way to deal with a dangerous animal isn't to fight it, but to understand it. On Earth, we learned this lesson with many creatures: wolves, bears, sharks. Once we understood their behavior, we found ways to live alongside them. Suddenly, emergency alarms blared through the chamber. A young aide rushed in, panic on their face. "High Council, a group of 5 shadow moths has just appeared in the Lyra system. They're heading straight for the capital planet." The council members began to panic, but Duha's voice cut through the chaos. "Let us try our plan, right now. We have nothing to lose and everything to gain." Ajin looked at the humans, then at the emergency display showing the approaching shadow moths. Finally, he nodded. "Do it. But if you fail, we won't," Jai-Won said confidently. She turned to Sun-Ho and Tai-Yang. "Let's get back to the ship. We have some feeding stations to build and some very big creatures to talk to." As they left the council chamber, Duha heard the council members whispering among themselves. Some thought humans were crazy. Others thought they were geniuses. But everyone agreed on one thing. This would either be the biggest breakthrough in galactic history or the biggest disaster. The humans preferred to think it would be a breakthrough. After all, they had done the impossible once already. Now they just had to do it again, but bigger. And this time, the whole galaxy would be watching. The Horizon Seeker raced through space toward the Lyra system. In the ship's main cargo bay, engineers worked at record speed to build the first Shadow Maw feeding station. "Power core stable," Sun-Ho called out, checking readings on his tablet. "Energy signature is perfect. Exactly what attracts them." Jai-Won stood nearby, making final adjustments to a larger version of her communication device. This one was built into the feeding station itself. Tai-Yang watched the work while studying tactical displays. 5 shadow moths, he muttered. "We've only tried this with one before. Then we'll make history again," Jai-Won said confidently. She looked up as Captain Duha entered the cargo bay. "We're 10 minutes from the drop point," Duha announced. "How's our little fishing lure coming along?" "Ready for deployment," Sun-Ho replied. "We've tuned it to produce 3 times the energy signature of a planetary power grid. If we're right about their feeding habits, they won't be able to resist." Alarms sounded throughout the ship. Yuri's voice came over the speakers. "Captain, the Shadow Moths have changed course. They're heading straight for Lyra's capital planet. Launch the station," Duha ordered. Now, the cargo bay doors opened to space. The feeding station, glowing with powerful energy signatures, floated out into the darkness. Ji-1 activated her communication device, sending out bright pulses of light. "Like ringing the dinner bell," she said with a smile. Everyone rushed to the bridge. On the main screen, they could see all 5 shadow moths, their massive forms blocking out the stars behind them. The feeding station looked tiny in comparison. "They've noticed the station," Yuri reported. "All 5 are. Yes, they're changing course." The crew watched in amazement as the shadow moths turned away from the planet. Their huge bodies moved with surprising grace as they approached the feeding station. "Send the next signal," Duha ordered. Jai-1 pressed buttons on her control panel. The feeding station pulsed with complex patterns of light. "I'm telling them this is a safe place to feed. That there's plenty for all of them." The largest shadow maw reached the station first. It circled once, twice, studying the energy signature. Then, to everyone's amazement, it responded with its own light patterns. "It's beautiful," Yuri whispered. The other shadow moths joined in, creating a dance of light in space. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony as they communicated with each other and the station. "What are they saying?" Duha asked. Jai-Wan's eyes were glued to her readings. There, they're talking about the food source, sharing information. It's exactly like a pod of whales finding a good feeding spot. The largest shadow moth suddenly moved closer to the station. Everyone held their breath. Then, with movements that seemed almost gentle, it began to feed on the station's energy. Power levels dropping exactly as planned. Sun-Ho reported excitedly. The containment fields are holding. This is working. The other shadow moths took turns, each feeding from the station while the others waited patiently. Their light patterns continued, creating a beautiful display in space. Look at that coordination, Tai Yang said in wonder. They're not fighting over the food. They're sharing it. Jai-Wan was practically jumping with excitement. They're not just sharing. They're teaching each other. The bigger ones are showing the smaller ones how to feed safely from the station. They're learning. The council had been watching everything through a live feed. He-Jin's voice came over the communication system. This is incredible. In all our centuries of fighting them, we never imagined. Sometimes the best way to handle a dangerous creature is to stop treating it like an enemy, Duha said quietly. These beings aren't monsters. They're just trying to survive, like any other animal. As they watched, the shadow moths finished feeding. The largest one sent out a final pattern of light, a signal that Jai-Wan swore looked like gratitude, before they all moved away from the station. Track their course, Duha ordered. They're leaving the system, Yuri reported with amazement. All 5 of them. The capital planet is safe. Cheers erupted on the bridge. In just a few minutes, they had succeeded where centuries of military might had failed. They hadn't defeated the shadow moths. They had understood them. And this was just the beginning. News of the successful feeding station spread quickly across the galaxy. 1 week later, the Horizon Seekers crew gathered in a large observation room aboard the Council station, watching recordings of their latest discovery. Play it again, Jai-Wan said excitedly. Watch what happens when the new group arrives. The holographic display showed 3 shadow moths approaching a feeding station. As they got closer, they met another group that was just finishing their meal. Instead of fighting or running away, the 2 groups started exchanging complex patterns of light. There, Sun-Ho pointed. See how the first group is showing the new ones where to feed. They're passing on what they learned. Duha smiled as he watched. In just 1 week, they had set up 10 feeding stations in empty systems. The shadow moths were not only using them, they were teaching other shadow moths about them. It's like watching elephants, Tai Yang said thoughtfully. On Earth, elephant herds pass knowledge down through generations. The older ones teach the younger ones where to find water, which foods are safe. Exactly. Jai-Wan jumped up and started pacing, something she did when excited. These creatures aren't just smart, they're highly social. They learn from each other. They share information. They even have feeding schedules. She pulled up another recording. This one showed different groups of shadow moths visiting the same feeding station at regular intervals. Look at the timing, she said. Group A feeds for 6 hours, then leaves. Group B arrives exactly 12 hours later. They're organizing themselves. They're creating their own feeding rotation. He-Jin, who had been quietly watching from the corner, stepped forward. In all our centuries of fear, we never imagined they could be so organized. That's because you were too busy trying to fight them, Sun-Ho said gently. You never had a chance to just watch them be themselves. Suddenly, Yuri rushed into the room. Captain, you need to see this. She pulled up a live feed on the main screen. It showed a new group of shadow moths, but they weren't at any of the feeding stations. Instead, they were approaching an inhabited system. Everyone tensed, but Jai-Wan raised her hand. Wait, watch. As they observed, a shadow moth they recognized, the large one from their first contact, appeared near the new group. It immediately started sending out light patterns. It's warning them, Ji-Won said excitedly. It's telling them this system is off-limits and showing them where to find the feeding stations instead. They watched in amazement as the new group changed course, following the large shadow maw away from the inhabited system. They're not just learning to use the stations, Tai Yang said with wonder. They're starting to protect inhabited systems on their own. Duha turned to Hejin. How many attacks have there been since we set up the feeding stations? None, Hejin replied, his voice filled with disbelief. Not a single one. Some shadow maws have approached inhabited systems, but each time, others arrive and guide them away. Like teaching young animals which areas are safe to feed in and which aren't. Jai-One nodded. They're creating their own rules, their own culture around these feeding stations. Sun Ho pulled up a galaxy map showing all known shadow maw movements. Look at the pattern. They're establishing regular routes between feeding stations. It's like migration paths. And all of this happened in seconds, Hejin said, shaking his head. Centuries of warfare, and humans solved it in seconds with a simple feeding station. Not seconds, Duha corrected him. Thousands of years. That's how long it took humanity to learn these lessons on Earth. To understand that the best way to live with powerful creatures isn't to fight them, but to understand them and give them space to be themselves. As if to prove his point, the main screen showed more shadow maws gathering at various feeding stations. Their light patterns created beautiful displays in space, like silent songs shared between gentle giants. So what now? Hejin asked. Jai-One smiled. Now we learn from them. There's so much we don't know about these amazing creatures, and maybe, just maybe, they have as much to teach us as we had to teach them. Outside the station's windows, a shadow maw passed by, its body rippling with peaceful patterns of light. No one flinched or ran away. Instead, they watched in wonder as it moved through space, no longer a monster to be feared, but a magnificent creature to be understood. The galaxy would never be the same again. And that was a good thing. 3 months after the first feeding station was built, the Galactic Council held a special ceremony. The Great Hall was packed with beings from every corner of the galaxy, all gathered to witness something no one had thought possible. Captain Duha stood at the center of the stage with his crew. Behind them, through the massive window, 3 shadow maws danced in space, their light patterns creating beautiful shows for the watching crowd. To think we once feared these patterns, Hejin said as he stepped up to the speaking platform. What we thought were signals of attack were actually their way of saying hello. The crowd murmured in agreement. Many of them had lost worlds to the shadow maws. But now, those same creatures were part of a carefully managed network of wildlife sanctuaries across the galaxy. 642 feeding stations now operate in uninhabited systems, Jai-One reported proudly. Every single one is regularly visited by shadow maw groups. Not one attack has been reported since the network was established. Sun Ho stepped forward with his own report. We've identified 32 different shadow maw groups, each with their own feeding routes. They're even more organized than we thought. They have family groups, teaching patterns, even what looks like play behavior between younger ones. The crowd gasped as one of the shadow maws outside did a graceful spin, its body creating spiral patterns of light. Ji-One smiled. She knew this one. It was the first shadow maw they had ever communicated with, now nicknamed Star Dancer by the crew. But the most amazing discovery, Tai Yang added, is how they'd started protecting inhabited systems. They actively guide new shadow maws to feeding stations and away from populated worlds. They're not just accepting our boundaries, they're enforcing them themselves. Duha watched Star Dancer's light show with pride. We've learned so much from them. Their ability to phase through solid matter has helped us develop new shield technologies. Their energy processing systems have given us ideas for better power plants. By working with them instead of against them, we've gained allies instead of enemies. Hejin raised his hands for quiet. Today, we recognize not just the achievement of understanding these magnificent creatures, but the lesson humanity has taught us. Sometimes the greatest dangers can become the greatest gifts if we only take the time to understand instead of fear. He turned to the Earth crew. Captain Duhua Kim, Ji-won Lee, Sun Ho Park, Tai-yang Park, Yu Ri-moon. You and your crew will go down in history as the ones who changed everything. The Shadow Maw sanctuaries will stand as a testament to humanity's unique way of seeing the universe. The crowd erupted in cheers. Outside, all three Shadow Maws lit up in synchronized patterns, as if they too were celebrating. Later, as the ceremony wound down, Jai-won stood at the window watching Star Dancer. The massive creature had noticed her and moved closer, sending a familiar pattern of light. "What's it saying?" Yuri asked, joining her. Jai-won smiled. "The same thing it always says when it sees us. Friend." Du had joined them at the window. "You know, when we first made contact with the Council, I worried that Earth had nothing special to offer such advanced civilizations. Instead, Sun Ho laughed. We taught the most advanced races in the galaxy how to make friends with their biggest fear." Tai-yang nodded thoughtfully. "All because we remembered the lessons our own world taught us, that understanding is better than fear, that every creature has its place, and that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one." Outside, Star Dancer finished its light show and began to move away. But before it left, it released one final pattern, a new one they hadn't seen before. "What did that one mean?" Hejin asked, curious. Jai-won's eyes were bright with tears of joy. "That was a new word. It means family." The humans watched as Star Dancer joined its group and disappeared into the darkness of space. They weren't really gone, though. They would be back tomorrow, following their feeding schedule, living in harmony with the very civilizations that once feared them. The galaxy had changed forever. The most feared creatures had become the most cherished ones. And it all started because a few humans looked at the galaxy's deadliest predators and saw not monsters, but animals that just needed to be understood. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. A new way of looking at an old problem, and the courage to try something different. The age of fear was over. The age of understanding had begun.